Good morning. I'm Heather McLean. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a member of our board of directors. Welcome to White Bear Unitarian Universalist Church. We are a community of youth, adults, and children of many diverse theologies, held together by covenant, not creed. Together we share the values of courage, reverence, and compassion. May you know deep welcome and belonging in this place. You are welcome here, whether it is your first time or your 100th. You are welcome here on this weekend where we gather to remember, to tend to our spirits, to strengthen the bonds of community, and to continue to commit to working for justice and equity in this world, in this nation. Welcome, visitors. We are so glad that you're here. If you're visiting with children, we do offer spiritual growth opportunities for our younger beloveds at the 11 a.m. service. At both services, we offer nursery care. As always, your children are also welcome to stay with you during the service. We welcome the noises, movements, and mirth that little ones bring. Let's take a moment to wave to all of those that are online as well. Welcome, Zoomers. Welcome to our church. Together we grow our souls and serve the world in love.
I shall pass through this world, but once. I shall pass through this world, but once. Any good, therefore good that I can do, or any kindness that I can show, or any kindness that I can show to any human being, any human being, to any human being, let me do it, let me do it now, do it now, let me not defer or neglected, for I shall not pass this way again. I shall not pass this way again. Pass this I shall pass through this world but once. I shall pass through this world but once.
I'm Reverend Jessica, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the lead minister of this congregation. I invite you to join me in our call to worship if you know it, and I know many of you do. Come in. Come into this place which we make holy by our presence. Come in with all your vulnerabilities and strengths, fears and anxieties, loves and hopes. For here you need not hide nor pretend, nor be anything other than who you are and who you are called to be. Come into this place where we can touch and be touched, heal and be healed, forgive and be forgiven. Come into this place where the ordinary is sanctified, the human is celebrated, the compassionate is expected. Come into this place. Together we make it a holy place.
My name is Amy, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm your Director of Religious Education. Our chalice lighting today was written by Ade Ama Kraba. Spirit of life, we have come here today to remember what some are intent on making us forget. To remember a man who fought to end segregation, to remember a man who marched to counter prejudice and oppression, to remember a man who was filled with peace and hope, to remember a man with promise and a dream, to remember a man with a voice that rang out for justice and freedom. All these things we remember and honor in the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and a life well lived in service to all. May it be so. Will you please join me in our opening words? Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Will you please rise in body and spirit for hymn number 298, Wake Now My Senses. Good morning. I'd like to share with you all this morning a brief retelling and adaptation of an old story by Washington Irving, and maybe it'll sound familiar to some of you. There once was a man named Rip Van Winkle. He lived in a village at the foot of the Catskill Mountains long ago, and while he was kind and liked to share lots of stories, he always did his very best to avoid hard work or anything unpleasant at all. So one day, as the story goes, Rip Van Winkle made his way up into the mountains to go hunting, and after meeting a mysterious passerby, Rip Van Winkle sat down for a little rest under a tree, and he fell asleep. Now, this was no ordinary nap. For you see, when Rip Van Winkle woke up, he had a long beard, and his musket was all rusty, and when he made his way down the hill, he saw that the picture of King George III had been replaced by a person he did not recognize. He had slept for 20 years. And while he had fallen asleep in the British colonies, there had been a whole revolution while he slept, and now George Washington was president of the United States, which is where he woke up living. So this is an old and famous story, and it might surprise you to know that it was a favorite of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It was one he told a lot, and in fact, he told it to a large crowd of Unitarian Universalists in 1966 during the Ware Lecture, and he talked about the civil rights movement, and he urged all of those who heard him to maybe try not sleeping through the revolution, that we should wake up. Can you imagine what might be different in 20 years from now? If we think back to what was different 20 years ago, we can imagine that a lot can change in 20 years. And Dr. King reminds us that we all have a role to play, right? That if we all work together, we maybe can change quite a bit ourselves in 20 years if we stay awake. So there's work to do. We must imagine and work towards the world we want to create if we all work together rather than sleeping through the revolution.
I hear you on that, Amy, although when she said 20-year nap, how many of you thought, oh, that sounds kind of nice right now? I did. So now we make space to name the joys and sorrows in our community. I'm aware that many are carrying a lot this week, so this morning we're going to do something a little different. RAC has a mic that they will walk around with, and you are invited to name your joy or your sorrow into this community. If you're watching online, you can type it in the chat box, and I will read those out. But some of you may have come from smaller congregations where you did this every Sunday. I like to do this every once in a while when I think the community is holding so much, and it is a gift to allow others to help bear witness to what we're carrying. Who would like to name something in community this morning?
Hold up Jesse and Connor.
Okay, speak real loud into the mic. Jesse and Connor.
For my mother, Joyce, on her 95th birthday.
Rack, we have a hand over here.
Comment about joyful moment. We spent the afternoon at the Train Museum with our two granddaughters yesterday, And it was a good reprieve from all the negative news and makes me a little more hopeful for the future.
Wonderful.
I'd like to name a joy that I've just found out that the archivist project for the White Bear Unitarian Church is moving forward, and nothing gives me more joy than a history that is being saved. So thank you to everybody that's doing that.
I got a video this week to prove that my grandniece is a giggle box.
I'm requesting support and good vibes for my two sisters and me as we move my dad from our childhood home into an assisted living.
I was at the concert at this church on Friday night. Some of you were there as well. It was one of the most joyful and mind-changing concerts I've heard in a long time. With this man at the helm, we are so lucky to have him.
Acknowledging support for my wife's sister as she enters hospice.
Yeah. Holding Susan in care. Yeah.
Thankful for the life of Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter.
Thinking of Carolyn Pizzini today as she mourns the death of her husband, Joe.
We have a hand over here, Rack.
I'm very hopeful that there might finally be a peace in Gaza and allow people to return and rebuild their lives.
For all of these prayers which have been said, we hold in care, and for the prayers which are on our hearts, but were not named in this space, we also hold those in care. We continue our joy that there is ceasefire in Gaza, and we hold the Winker family in deep care. And Jihad's family is safe. They're happy to report, and they pray for a continued end to the genocide and full release of the hostages. And so now is the time where you can name into this space the prayers that you have. Maybe you didn't want to name them into a microphone, which I get, but maybe you want to name them in this space now. We hold Samantha Clemente in our hearts in celebration of Samantha's husband, Brendan, who just released his debut album as a solo artist. Congratulations, Brendan. We hold Judy Nielsen in our hearts, and Judy is soon leaving for Arizona, where there will be a mini reunion. And we hold Jean Doolittle and her family in care as we send prayers for her son, who is leaving for a 10-month deployment in Kuwait, with his wife and son staying behind. For all of these prayers of our community, we hold them in care this morning. Our prayer this morning is from Reverend Kathleen Rollens. I invite you to settle into your seat. If you have something in your hands, set it down. If you're doing something while watching online, we have about 57 households joining us online. I invite you to set it down and make a little space to receive these words. Spirit of justice, God who befriends those who stand upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone, we are grateful to be together this morning. We gather especially to remember Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but not only him, for there were thousands of unnamed people who put their bodies and lives on the line so that all may be free. And yet, Freedom comes at a cost, and we know that racism and homophobia, ageism and ableism, sexism and classism, all of these often unacknowledged realities prevent us from fully knowing one another, from creating the beloved community spoken of by prophets and ordinary persons alike. May the work of Dr. King continue to eradicate injustice wherever and whenever we encounter it. May we continue to speak out against injustice, to speak even if we are afraid our words will not be heard or welcomed. May the spirit of Dr. King continue to flow through our daily living. May we have the courage of Dr. King as we continue to stand up for justice, reconciliation, and truth, despite challenge and controversy. Dr. King went to the mountaintop. He saw the promised land, and he reassured us that we will get there one day. May that be no paradisal dream, but a reality in our own time. May it be so, and amen.
You may remain seated for the singing of our next hymn, which is number 1023 in your teal hymnal, Building Bridges. This piece is a round, so we're going to split into a few different groups. Choir, I'm going to split you into 4 groups. Let's have 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'll split the room approximately 1, 2, 3, and 4. We'll start it by singing the entire melody once together, and then we will go group 1 through 4. Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Building bridges between our divisions, I'm 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 reach out to me with all of our voices and all of our visions. Friends, come to make such sweet harmony. Building bridges between our divisions. I reach out to you, reach out to me. With all of our voices and all of our visions. Friends, we could make such sweet harmony.
Now is the time where we make space for announcements and our offertory. This Wednesday evening, we have a meal at 5:30, followed by several opportunities for connection, including choir practice, programming for kids, and a forum on the loneliness epidemic and building community. All are welcome. Twice a month, we do a special collection where the entire proceeds go to an organization selected by members of this congregation. The special collection today will go to the Black Student Union at White Bear Lake area schools. This collection will enable junior and senior high school students of color from White Bear High School and surrounding schools to participate in a tour of historically Black colleges and universities for the purpose of exploring opportunities in higher education. This tour will expose young students to speakers, faculty, staff, and students who have had similar challenges and backgrounds. The goal of the college tour is to support these students to identify educational opportunities and inspire them to be future leaders within our communities. During last year's tour, which WBUUC supported, 15 students applied, and 4 were immediately accepted to these colleges. The Black Student Union students will be participating in the Martin Luther King celebration at Parkview UCC on January 20th. There are a couple of ways that you can give today. You can use the text to give feature, the numbers on the screen. You can give on the website, or you can place cash or a check in the offertory basket. Whichever way you give, please indicate the keyword tour. Thank you for your generosity and your faith in this life that we live together. The offering will now be gratefully collected.
Bend the arc and break the ceiling. Bend the arc and break the ceiling. Human rights for human beings. Human rights for human beings. Bend the arc and break the ceiling. Bend the arc and break the ceiling. Human rights for human beings. Human rights for human beings. Bend the arc. 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 Bend the arc and break the ceiling. Bend the arc and break the ceiling. Human rights for human beings. Human rights for human beings. Bend the arc and break the ceiling. Bend the arc and break the ceiling. Human rights for human beings. Human rights for human beings. Bend the arc. 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 Bend the arc.
Okay, choir. Our first reading this morning is from theologian Howard Thurman. During these turbulent times, we must remind ourselves repeatedly that life goes on. This we are apt to forget. The wisdom of life transcends our wisdoms. The purpose of life outlasts our purposes. The process of life cushions our processes. The mass attack of delusion and despair, distilled out of the collapse of hope, has so invaded our thoughts that what we know to be true and valid seems unreal and ephemeral. There seems to be little energy left for aught but futility. This is the great deception. By it, whole peoples have gone down to oblivion without the will to affirm the great and permanent strength of the clean and commonplace. Let us not be deceived. It is just as important as ever to attend to the little graces by which the dignity of our lives is maintained and sustained. Birds still sing. The stars continue to cast their gentle gleam over the desolation of the battlefields, and the heart is still inspired by the kind word and the gracious deed. There is no need to fear evil. There is every need to understand what it does, how it operates in the world, what it draws upon to sustain itself. We must not shrink from the knowledge of the evilness of evil. Over and over, we must know that the real target of evil is not destruction of the body, the reduction to rubble of cities. The real target of evil is to corrupt the spirit of people and give their souls the contagion of inner disintegration. When this happens, there is nothing left. The very citadel of people is captured and laid waste. Therefore, the evil in this world around us must not be allowed to move from without to within. This would be to be overcome by evil, to drink in the beauty that is within reach, to clothe one's life with simple deeds of kindness, to keep alive sensitiveness to the movement of the Spirit of God in the quietness of the human heart and in the workings of the human mind. This is, as always, the ultimate answer to the great deception.
Our second reading is Praise Song for the Day by Elizabeth Alexander, a poem for Barack Obama's presidential inauguration. Each day we go about our business, walking past each other, catching each other's eyes or not, about to speak or speaking. All about us is noise. All about us is noise and bramble, thorn and din, each one of our ancestors on our tongues. Someone is stitching up a hem, darning a hole in a uniform, patching a tire, repairing the things in need of repair. Someone is trying to make music somewhere with a box of wooden spoons on an oil drum with cello, boombox, harmonica, voice. A woman and her son wait for the bus. A farmer considers the changing sky. A teacher says, "Take out your pencils, begin." We encounter each other in words spiny or smooth, whispered or declaimed, words to consider, reconsider. We cross dirt roads and highways that mark the will of someone and then others who said, "I need to see what's on the other side. I know there's something better down the road. We need to find a place where we are safe." We walk into that which we cannot yet see. Say it plain, that many have died for this day. Sing the names of the dead who brought us here, who laid the train tracks, raised the bridges, picked the cotton and the lettuce, built brick by brick the glittering edifices they would then keep clean and work inside of. Praise song for struggle, praise song for the day, praise song for every hand-lettered sign, the figuring it out at kitchen tables. Some live by love thy neighbor as thyself, others by first do no harm or take no more than you need. What if the mightiest word is love? Love beyond marital, filial, national, love that casts a widening pool of light, love with no need to preempt grievance. In today's sharp sparkle, this winter air, anything can be made, any sentence begun. On the brink, on the brim, on the cusp. Praise song for walking forward in that light.
Precious Lord, take my hand.
So beautiful, choir. Thank you. On April 3rd, 1968, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered a sermon in Memphis titled, "I've Been to the Mountaintop." He began it by thanking his best friend, Ralph Abernathy, and then thanking everyone for coming, saying, "I'm delighted to see each of you here tonight in spite of the storm warning. You reveal that you are determined to go on anyhow." And so as I begin my sermon here today, saying I'm delighted to see each of you here and delighted to see those online, in spite of or in addition to this extreme cold, my thermostat said -13 when I was driving here. You all reveal that you are determined to go on anyhow. So give yourself a little pat. Say, yes, I made it to church this morning. Turn to your neighbor and say, thanks for coming to church this morning. So this week, a week that felt like a year, right? I felt a bit, and by a bit I mean a lot, of existential dread this week. I would glance at the news to try to see what's coming just enough, but not too much, and every time I opened the app on my phone, I regretted it. I noticed an energy in the room at our board meeting here on Wednesday night. There was a weary energy. People were tired. People were dealing with personal griefs, fear for our country, and yet they were determined to go on anyhow, showing up for each other and for this congregation. And our Wednesday night supper was full of people determined to go on anyhow, bringing games, seeking community, reminding each other of the power of being grounded in the present. And here we are. The thing that so many of us dreaded is here. The holidays were a nice distraction for some, but impending doom still felt on the horizon. And we gather because we are determined to go on anyhow. On that evening of April 3rd, 1968, Reverend Dr. King began his sermon with a historical view. He said, something is happening here in Memphis, something is happening in our world. And then he talked about moving through history, thousands of years of history, about the things that he wished he would have seen if he could go back in time. He took this panoramic view of history to demonstrate how far we've come and to tell people to not give up hope. Throughout the sermon, he talked about the gratitude of being alive, to see how people were rising up against injustice. He said he saw God working in the world and working in people. He talked about how important it was that people show up for each other, that the revolution depends on people showing up for each other, and being grounded in his faith, his love of God. And we Unitarian Universalists, we come to our congregations to be grounded in love of each other, of ourselves, of our planet, of the ways we are interconnected and interdependent, to be reminded of that long arc of history. So many of you may know this, but Dr. King read many abolitionists, and the words that he spoke so many times about the moral arc of the universe being long but bending towards justice. Who knows who originally said that? I know, Dick, you do. No, you don't? I thought you did. Sorry to call you out. Does anyone know who originally said that? Yes. Theodore Parker, Unitarian minister and abolitionist Theodore Parker. I thought it's probably been said from this pulpit any number of times in front row, but in a sermon published in 1853, Theodore Parker said, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. But from what I see, I'm sure it bends towards justice. Things refuse to be mismanaged long." Be glad this is not the first version of the sermon I wrote. It's gone through some iterations. Theodore Parker was known for being a transcendentalist, questioning biblical literacy and working for all of the reform movements of the day, including sheltering people who had been enslaved to keep them from being captured. There's this famous story about him writing sermons with a loaded pistol in his desk as he was actively working against the Fugitive Slave Act. And here we gather, 175 years after Theodore Parker wrote about bending the arc, 70 years after Dr. King spoke about bending the arc. And maybe you, like me, wanted to see a bit more progress than we have. I want a visual map of the progress, nicely laid out. I want a future that I have hope in for my daughter, for all of the generations that come after us. And like I spoke of in my sermon before the election, if progress is always our goal, we're going to be constantly disappointed. We know history is full of bends and turns, and that the future is uncertain at best. And so we're left with this arc that isn't very clear. We may not know which direction it's bending towards, depending on the day. And that doesn't mean that we don't stop working for it. But as I take that long view of history, I see humanity going in fits and starts, and power continues to corrupt leaders, tyrants are elected, fascism takes hold, and war and destruction continue. And that doesn't mean that there isn't any hope, but it is the reality of our history and of the present day. In Buddhism, the Buddha famously said that all of life is suffering. And many Buddhist teachings are around how our own expectations cause suffering. Therefore, if I am expecting a world with peace, a world with equality, a world where people care about each other and are looking out for themselves, that was wrong. A world where people care about each other and are looking out for each other first and foremost, a world where people care about the planet on a worldwide level, I'm going to be constantly disappointed. But instead, if I accept that all those things I dream about are happening on small scales, this is what supports me to decrease my own suffering in the midst of it all. It helps to have an open and curious heart to witness the people who have many reasons to give up, but what gets them out of bed in the morning is caring for their neighbor, is caring for each other, is creating a way where there is no way because it matters. This is what brings hope in the midst of suffering. And this small-scale hope can be enough. In the sermon he gave that night in Memphis, Dr. King told the story of the Good Samaritan, but he told it from the standpoint of what would have happened to the person on the side of the road if the Samaritan didn't help him. The two people that passed that person who was ailing prior to the Samaritan, their main question was, what will happen to me if I help him? And the Samaritan asked, what will happen to this person who is hurting if I don't help him? Therefore, our prevailing question of the day is, what will happen to our siblings on the margins if we do not help them? What will happen to this nation that is reverting to fascism if we don't speak up? These are the questions that keep me awake at night. And what helps me to eventually get to sleep after that is to remember that we're all in this together. But we're in this for a long haul. It's not a race. This is an endurance marathon. And that place where I see the arc bending is within places like this, our liberal religious traditions that say, these are the values we are for, and this is the world we dream about that we are helping to bring into being right here. Even if we don't see it reflected in our nation at large, this is the world that we commit to because we cannot leave the person on the side of the road because we care about them. We care about our trans siblings. We care about trans youth in this nation. We care about people of color. We care about people, period. We care about humanity. We care about the planet. Yes? Yes. We bend the arc within our hearts to bring the world we dream about into being in our communities. And so, to move through the world today, we are invited into an acceptance of what is and commitment to our dreams, but not holding them so tightly that we spend the next 4 years suffering. We're invited to engage in our dreams, to have hope for the future in a way with our palms open to what? To open to possibilities. Because if we go into situations like this, we may miss that yes, that might make a difference to each of us, to this community. We might miss opportunities for connection. Life is so fragile. Our hearts shatter and reform again and again in our lifetimes. We do not know how much time any of us have on this beautiful planet. And yet, if we're grounded in our call, grounded in our spiritual practices, grounded in our practices around dismantling oppressions, this is our call to help one another, to be rooted and resilient with hands and hearts open and curious for what is to come. Because if we spend the next 4 years angry, afraid, hiding under our blankets, and I'm not saying there won't be days when we need to do that, take that day if you need it. But if we spend the totality of our time doing that, we will miss the snowflakes in their magnificence. We will miss the glorious feeling of our nose hairs freezing when it drops below 4 degrees. It's a glorious feeling. And remember, spring always comes. We will miss those spring dandelions bursting forth from our lawns. We will miss the opportunities for connection in this community and in our wider communities. So please do not get so lost in despair that you forget the glorious feeling of being alive and that glorious feeling to notice how much beauty we are surrounded by just looking out our windows. At the end of his sermon, Dr. King talked about several years before he was at a book signing in New York City and he had been stabbed at the signing. He was rushed to the hospital and the doctor said, if you would have sneezed, you would have died. It was published in the paper that if he would have sneezed, he would have died. And he received a letter from a little girl that said, I'm so glad you didn't sneeze. Then, as he's going through the sermon, he reflected on all of the historical events he felt so grateful that he got to witness. He said, if I would have sneezed, I wouldn't have gotten to witness the March in Selma. If I would have sneezed, I wouldn't have gotten to tell the people of the United States about a dream I had. If I would have sneezed, I wouldn't have been able to witness the bringing the Civil Rights Bill into being in Birmingham in 1963. He kept saying, I'm just so happy I didn't sneeze. He then talked about all the safety measures to get him to Memphis. He said, quote, and then I got into Memphis, and some began to say the threats or talk about the threats that were out. What would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers? Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't really matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. And I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And I'm so happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Many of you know what happened the next day. Dr. King was killed the following day. And so we honor him here, we honor him across the United States this weekend with his legacy of commitment to civil rights, of his commitment to speaking up for the person on the side of the road that other people ignored. We honor the fragility of his life, of our lives. And this morning we have an opportunity to recommit to showing up. Dr. King ended his speech with a bit of foreshadowing, saying, I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know that I've centered my life and my calling in my faith, and that I know it will continue long after I've gone. And his final quote, as you heard, was from Battle Hymn of the Republic. He quoted that often, mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Battle Hymn of the Republic was written by Julia Ward Howe, a Unitarian who saw the Union troops singing the original version of the song, which was John Brown's Body, at the beginning of the Civil War. And James Freeman Clarke, a Unitarian minister, leaned over to her and said, "You should rewrite lyrics to this." And so she did. Battle Hymn of the Republic was a song about the abolition of slavery. The threads of history connect all of us, and they call upon us to do the work, even though it's inconvenient, like Amy talked about last week. Door knocking is hard, but she did it because it matters. And so over and over again over these next years, you will be asked to do things that you probably don't want to do. Now, if any of your minds went immediately to getting arrested, that's not what I'm talking about. But real talk here, since the pandemic, which is still occurring, it's really hard to get people to leave their homes. To get people to leave their homes and to show up, we as a church staff often have this conversation of what's going to bring people into the building. We have many things pulling at our lives. Hockey parents, I see you. That's a whole nother thing. And we're asking you to say yes to each other because that's the way we're going to get through the next 4 years. In November, I said 3 things were going to get us through this time. The first was spiritual practices. The second was nobody can make it out here alone. And the third was let's do our work together. And so I have a couple of invitations for you in number 3. Let's do our work together. There are members of our social action committee who will be at a table in the social hall with ways you can take action right now to support housing for all. Please go see them in the social hour. And please mark your calendars for February 2nd, when Pastor Anthony Galloway will be preaching. He will be speaking about the Raising Racial Consciousness workshops we'll be offering March, April, May, and September, October, and November. We will have information about these workshops coming out shortly and hope that as many people as possible are able to sign up for them. These are a few of the ways that we can connect and bend that arc, but all of us are needed. You who are watching this from Zoom, you, the visitor, who this might be your first Sunday, and you, longtime member who is tired of fighting this fight. Remember that we need you. Your siblings need you to do the work to draw the circle wide, to honor the fragility of life and our interdependence. Together, we are determined to go on anyhow. Amen.
Please rise and bow to your spirit for the singing of our final hymn this morning. Number 115 in your gray hymnal, Circle Round for Freedom. We'll be singing this 3 times, starting by singing the melody together. The second time, I encourage the choir or anybody else who would like to sing the harmony parts to do so. And then we'll end by singing it unaccompanied. Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us in prison, circle for release, circle for the planet, circle for each soul, for the children
Circle round each other in this week to come, beloveds. Remember, you are held by this community, held in love. Together, we will go on anyhow. May you feel the love anchoring you here, anchoring you in this faith, in this community, for whatever is to come. Amen. Will you turn to your neighbor and say, thank you for being part of the circle, and invite them to coffee hour?